The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a rider whose face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Thomas Miller watched from the broken fence line as the stranger dismounted, boots hitting the frost-hardened Montana soil with purpose. The man's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion worth more than everything Tom owned combined, pawed at the ground impatiently, steam rising from its nostrils in the cold autumn air. "Thomas Miller?" the rider called out, voice cutting through the wind. Tom straightened his back, wiped calloused hands on worn denim. "That'd be me." The man approached, withdrew a cream-colored envelope from inside his coat. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Tom had only ever seen in the mercantile's display window in Pinecrest Valley. It bore a wax seal pressed with an unfamiliar crest. "From Miss Victoria Harrington," the rider said, extending the envelope. "She requires a response before sundown." Tom accepted the envelope with dirt-stained fingers, acutely aware of how rough they looked against such fine paper. "Harrington, of Harrington Heights?" The rider merely nodded, already turning back toward his horse. "Wait," Tom called. "How am I supposed to deliver a response? Harrington Heights is half a day's ride." "I'll wait," the man said, glancing at the dilapidated barn. "Though I'd prefer somewhere out of this wind." As Tom broke the seal and unfolded the letter, his eyes widened with each precisely written line. By the time he finished reading, his hands were trembling. Not from the cold, but from words that would change everything. "Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Thomas Miller had never considered himself unlucky, just realistic. At 28, he'd learned that the world didn't hand out gifts, especially not to the son of immigrants who died before seeing their dreams of prosperity take root in Montana territory. Whispering Pines Ranch had been their legacy, their hope, 200 acres of promising land that now mocked Tom with every broken fence post and underfed cow. The drought had taken most of his herd last summer. The bank was circling like vultures over a dying animal, ready to claim what remained. 3 more months at most before Tom would join the ranks of displaced ranchers heading west with nothing but regrets. Now, as he read the letter for the 3rd time in his sparse kitchen, the oil lamp flickering weakly, Tom wondered if madness had finally found him. "Mr. Miller, you do not know me, but I am aware of your situation. I propose a business arrangement that would resolve your financial difficulties permanently. I require a husband immediately, for reasons I will explain in person. This is a marriage of convenience only. Terms: 1 year of marriage, after which you may choose to remain or leave with adequate compensation. Your debts will be settled upon our wedding. Your ranch will remain yours, regardless of future decisions. If interested, inform my messenger. A carriage will collect you tomorrow at dawn. Bring only personal necessities. No further correspondence before meeting. Victoria Harrington. Harrington Heights." Tom ran a hand through his dark hair, longer than it should be because he couldn't afford a proper haircut. Victoria Harrington. Everyone in 3 counties knew the name, though few had seen the woman. Herself, the cattle baroness of Ruby River. Orphaned at 22, she'd not only maintained her father's empire, but expanded it, while the neighboring ranches struggled. "Well?" The messenger's voice startled Tom from his thoughts. The man had entered silently, now standing by the door. "She's serious?" Tom asked, still half convinced this was an elaborate joke at his expense. "Miss Harrington doesn't jest, Mr. Miller." "Why me? She could have any man in the territory." The messenger's face remained impassive. "I deliver messages, sir. I don't question them." Tom gazed around his kitchen, the empty cupboards, the patched table, the single chair. He thought of his parents' graves on the hill, the promises he'd made as he'd covered their bodies with Montana soil. He thought of the bank notice folded in his drawer, the deadline approaching like a hangman's noose. "Tell Miss Harrington I accept," he said finally, the words tasting strange on his tongue. The messenger nodded once. "Dawn tomorrow. Pack lightly." He turned to leave, then paused. "And Mr. Miller, she prefers punctuality." After the messenger departed, Tom sought out the only person he trusted for advice. Silas Cooper had worked Whispering Pines since before Tom was born, staying on even when Tom could barely afford to feed him. He found the old ranch hand mending. "Tack in the barn," fingers still nimble despite their gnarled appearance. "Silas," Tom said, holding out the letter, "tell me I'm not making a deal with the devil." Silas read slowly, lips moving silently, then whistled low. "Harrington, eh? Never thought those eyes of hers would turn your way." "You've met her?" Tom leaned forward. "Once, at the cattle auction in Helena, 5 years back." Silas handed the letter back. "She outbid men twice her age without blinking, smart as a whip and cold as December." He paused, but never heard anything cruel about her, just distant. "She wants to marry me, sight unseen." Tom collapsed onto a hay bale. "Why would someone like that want someone like me?" Silas considered this, his weathered face thoughtful. "Rich folks have their reasons, boy, usually not the ones they tell you." He resumed his work on the bridle. "Question is, what choice do you have?" "None," Tom admitted quietly. "Then you best get some sleep. Dawn comes early, and Harrington Heights is a different world." As darkness fell, Tom packed his meager belongings, a spare shirt, his father's watch, a photograph of his parents on their wedding day. He polished his only good boots, trimmed his beard, and laid out the suit he'd worn to his parents' funerals. Sleep evaded him. Instead, he sat on his porch under a canopy of stars, wondering what Victoria Harrington truly wanted from him. The coyotes called in the distance, their howls carrying an ominous tone he'd never noticed before. The carriage arrived precisely. At dawn, an elegant black conveyance with the Harrington crest emblazoned on the door, pulled by 4 matched grey horses. The driver, dressed in livery finer than anything in Tom's closest, opened the door without a word. Silas appeared from the barn to see him off. "Remember who you are, boy," he said, gripping Tom's shoulder. "Fine houses and fine clothes don't make a man." "I'll be back," Tom promised, though uncertainty colored his voice. "One way or another," Silas agreed, his expression unreadable. The journey to Harrington Heights took 4 hours, winding along the Ruby River before turning east into the foothills. Tom watched as the landscape transformed, from the struggling farms and modest ranches he knew to increasingly prosperous operations. Finally, they passed through ornate iron gates and onto a tree-lined drive that seemed to stretch for eternity. When the house came into view, Tom nearly gasped. House was an inadequate word for the structure that commanded the hillside. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 stories of red brick and white columns, countless windows gleaming in the morning sun, chimneys reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. Formal gardens surrounded it, defying the Montana climate, and beyond them stretched fenced pastures, where fat cattle grazed contentedly. The carriage stopped at the front stairs. Tom stepped out, his legs stiff from the journey, and found himself facing a tall, severe man in formal attire. "Mr. Miller," the man said, not a question, but an acknowledgement. "I am Jenkins, Miss Harrington's butler. Please follow me." The foyer of Harrington Heights made Tom instantly conscious of his threadbare suit and scuffed boots. Marble floors reflected a crystal chandelier. A sweeping staircase led to upper floors. Oil paintings of stern-faced men and women. Harrington's past, he presumed, watched his passage with judgmental eyes. Jenkins led him through a maze of corridors to a study lined with books. "Miss Harrington will join you shortly," Please do not touch anything." Alone, Tom stood awkwardly in the center of the room, afraid to sit on the leather chairs that probably cost more than a year's earnings. Minutes stretched. He studied the books, leather-bound volumes with gold lettering, most titles in languages he couldn't read. "Mr. Miller." The voice, cool and measured, came from behind him. Tom turned and saw her for the first time. Victoria Harrington was not what he expected. The rumors spoke of a harsh, middle-aged spinster. The woman before him couldn't be older than 25. Tall and slender, she wore a high-necked dress of deep burgundy that emphasized her pale complexion. Her hair, the color of burnished copper, was pulled severely back, accentuating sharp cheekbones and penetrating green eyes that assessed him with unsettling directness. "Miss Harrington," Tom managed, giving an awkward bow. "You're taller than I anticipated," she said, moving to a desk by the window. "Please sit." Tom lowered himself into a chair, feeling like a schoolboy summoned by a stern teacher. "I assume you have questions," she continued, arranging papers before her. "I'll answer what I can, but first I must confirm you understand this is a business arrangement, not a romantic endeavor." "Yes, ma'am." "Victoria, please. If we're to be married, formalities would seem strange." She didn't smile as she said this. "Now, to address the obvious, why you?" Tom nodded, grateful she'd broached the subject first. "I require a husband, immediately for legal reasons. My father's will stipulates that if I am unwed by my 26th birthday, which occurs in 3 days, control of Harrington Holdings transfers to a board of trustees until I marry. I have no intention of relinquishing what is rightfully mine. And you chose me because you're educated enough to not embarrass me, poor enough to be motivated, and without family complications. You have a reputation for honesty, if not business acumen, and your failing ranch provides a convenient explanation for our hasty union. People will assume I married you for your land to expand my holdings." She paused. "Does that satisfy your curiosity?" It didn't. Not remotely. But Tom nodded anyway. "Good. The wedding is tomorrow morning. Judge Bennett will perform the ceremony here, with minimal witnesses. You'll be provided suitable attire." She pushed a document across the desk. "This contract outlines our arrangement. 1 year of marriage, during which you will live here and fulfill all public duties as my husband. Private arrangements are separate. Upon completion, you may leave with $20,000 or remain with negotiated terms." Tom stared at the figure. $20,000. More money than he'd see in 3 lifetimes of ranching. "Your current debts will be settled immediately, following the ceremony," Victoria continued. "Whispering Pines will receive necessary improvements to become productive again, regardless of your decision to stay or go after our year concludes." "Well, why not just hire an actor for a day?" Tom asked. "Seems simpler than a year of marriage." Something flickered in Victoria's green eyes. Approval, perhaps. "The trustees would investigate. This must be legally binding and convincing." She gestured to the contract. "Your signature if the terms are acceptable." Tom hesitated, pen hovering above paper. "What exactly would my duties entail?" "Accompanying me to necessary social functions, managing certain aspects of the ranch, operations, maintaining the appearance of a contented marriage." Her voice remained businesslike. "Nothing beyond your capabilities, I assure you." With a deep breath, Tom signed his name. "Excellent." Victoria rose. "Jenkins will show you to your quarters. Dinner is at 7. We have much to discuss before tomorrow." At the door, she paused. "One more thing, Mr. Miller." "Yes?" "The east wing of the house is private. Under no circumstances are you to enter it. Understood?" Before Tom could respond, she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and something else, something medicinal he couldn't identify, Jenkins reappeared as if summoned by an unseen signal. "This way, sir." The room assigned to Tom was larger than his entire cabin. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, while a sitting area with a private fireplace occupied another. Through one door, he discovered a dressing room already filled with clothing in his size. Through another, a private bathroom with running water, a luxury he'd experienced only in Helena's finest hotel. "How did she know my measurements?" Tom asked, examining a tailored jacket. "Miss Harrington is thorough in her preparations," Jenkins replied cryptically. "Will you require assistance dressing for dinner?" Tom almost laughed at the absurdity. "No, thank you. I've been managing buttons alone for some time now." Jenkins didn't smile. "Very good, sir. A bell will sound at 6:30. Please be punctual." Left alone, Tom explored his new accommodations, feeling increasingly like an imposter in someone else's life. The clothing was finer than anything he'd ever owned. Wool suits, cotton shirts, silk ties. Running his hand over the bed's coverlet, he discovered it was softer than any fabric he'd ever touched. He moved to the window and gazed out at Harrington Heights. From this vantage point, he could see the operation's vastness. Countless acres of grazing land, barns and outbuildings, workers' quarters, and in the distance, the glint of Ruby River. What kind of woman built and maintained all this alone? And why, with all her resources, would she choose a failing rancher as her husband, even temporarily? Dinner was a formal affair in a dining room that could have seated 30. Tom and Victoria sat at opposite ends of a table long enough to require raised voices for conversation. A succession of servants presented courses Tom couldn't name, using utensils he wasn't sure how to hold. Victoria, watching him struggle with an oyster fork, finally broke the silence. "Start from the outside and work your way in. Seems like a lot of metal to get food to your mouth," Tom observed, attempting levity. Victoria didn't smile, but her posture relaxed slightly. "Unnecessary complexity is the hallmark of wealth, Mr. Miller. Form over function." "Tom," he corrected. "If we're to be married." "Tom," she conceded. Throughout the meal, she briefed him on what to expect the following day, the ceremony, the legal proceedings, the few guests who would attend. Tom listened, feeling increasingly that he'd stepped into a stage play without learning his lines. "There will be rumors," Victoria warned. "Pinecrest Valley thrives on gossip, and our sudden marriage will provide ample material. We must present a united front." "What's our story?" Tom asked. "How did the wealthiest woman in the territory come to marry the poorest rancher?" For the first time, Victoria's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "We'll keep it simple. A chance. Meeting in Helena last spring. A whirlwind courtship conducted primarily through correspondence. A mutual love of the land. No one will believe that. They don't need to believe it. They only need to repeat it until something more interesting comes along." She set down her wineglass. "Do you dance, Tom?" The question caught him off. "Oh God, not since school socials." "We'll need to remedy that. The Founders' Day celebration is in 2 weeks. As my husband, you'll be expected to open the dancing with me." Tom's dismay must have shown on his face, because Victoria added, "Don't worry, I lead quite well." After dinner, Victoria retired immediately, leaving Tom to find his way back to his room. Instead, drawn by curiosity, he explored the main floor of the house, the conservatory filled with plants he couldn't name, the music room with its grand piano, the portrait gallery of Harrington ancestors. It was in the library that he found the first clue that Victoria Harrington might be more than the cold businesswoman she presented. A small alcove contained a collection of fairy tales and adventure novels, their spines well worn from repeated reading. On a nearby table sat a sketchbook open to a half-finished drawing of the view from the terrace, executed with surprising sensitivity. "Those areas are not off limits, but I would appreciate privacy in my personal pursuits." Tom turned to find Victoria in the doorway, now dressed in a simpler gown of deep blue. Her hair had been released from its severe style and fell in copper waves past her shoulders, transforming her appearance entirely. "I apologize," Tom said, closing the sketchbook. "I was just curious, understandable." She moved into the room. "Tomorrow changes everything, Mr. Miller. Are you prepared for that?" "No," he answered honestly, "but I haven't been prepared for much of anything since my parents died." Something in her expression softened momentarily. "That makes two of us, then." She reached for a book on a nearby shelf, a volume on cattle breeding. "You should know that while our marriage may be a business arrangement, I expect loyalty. Whatever you learn about me, about this house, remains private." "Of course. Good night, then." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Jenkins tells me you declined assistance dressing. Most men in your position would have embraced every luxury offered." Tom shrugged. "Most men in my position wouldn't be here at all." This time, Victoria's smile was unmistakable, if fleeting. "Perhaps I chose better than I realized. Sleep well, Tom Miller. Tomorrow everything changes." As promised, dawn brought transformation. Tom was awakened by a manservant who introduced himself as Parker, bearing a breakfast tray and information that the ceremony would take place at 10 o'clock. By 9, Tom had been bathed, shaved, and dressed in a suit that fit him as if he'd been measured by the tailor directly. Charcoal grey with a silver waistcoat and tie. "Miss Harrington selected the colors herself," Parker informed him. "She said they would complement your eyes." Tom stared at his reflection in the mirror. The man who looked back seemed a stranger, clean, polished, wrapped in finery. Only his hands, still calloused from years of ranch work, betrayed his true identity. "Will there be anything else, sir?" Parker asked. Tom fingered the old watch in his pocket, his father's prized possession. "No, thank you." The ceremony took place in the conservatory, among blooming flowers that defied the Montana autumn outside. Judge Bennett, a portly man with shrewd eyes, officiated. The witnesses consisted of Jenkins, Victoria's lawyer, Mr. Thornton, and to Tom's surprise, Silas. "Couldn't let you do this alone, boy," the old ranch hand whispered when Tom approached him. Borrowed proper clothes from the preacher. Victoria appeared precisely at 10, wearing a dress of ivory silk trimmed with lace. Her hair was arranged in an elegant coil, adorned with small white flowers. She wore no jewelry except a pendant, a single pearl suspended from a gold chain. The ceremony was brief. Tom repeated his vows in a steady voice, surprised by his own calmness. When he slipped the gold band onto Victoria's finger, a ring he'd been provided that morning, he noticed her hand trembled slightly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Bennett declared. "You may kiss the bride." This detail hadn't been discussed. Tom hesitated, looking to Victoria for guidance. Her green eyes met his, challenging. He leaned forward and pressed, his lips briefly to hers, a chaste kiss that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through him. What followed was a flurry of paperwork. Tom signed his name on countless documents, aware that with each signature his life changed irrevocably. Banknotes were produced showing the settlement of his debts. Deeds were modified. A substantial account was established in his name. Throughout it all, Victoria remained composed, answering questions with precision, directing the proceedings with quiet authority. Only once did her control slip, when Thornton referred to her father's will. "The matter is settled," she said sharply. "The required conditions have been met." By afternoon, the legal representatives had departed. Silas, after awkwardly congratulating the newlyweds, returned to Whispering Pines with promises that crew would arrive the following day to begin improvements. "I've taken the liberty of arranging a small dinner party this evening," Victoria informed Tom as they stood alone in the foyer. the most influential families in the county. Better to introduce you immediately than allow speculation to fester." "As you wish," Tom replied, still processing the morning's events. "Until then, you're free to explore the grounds. The stables might interest you. The foreman, Mackenzie, has been instructed to show you our breeding operation." She started toward the stairs, then turned back. "I never asked if you ride." Tom almost laughed. "Since before I could walk." "Good. We'll ride out together tomorrow morning. I should show my new husband his expanded holdings." With that, she ascended the staircase, leaving Tom to contemplate his strange new reality. The stables of Harrington Heights were a revelation. 50 thoroughbred horses housed in conditions better than most people lived in. Mackenzie, a weathered Scotsman, greeted Tom with cautious respect. "Congratulations on your marriage, sir," he said, though his tone suggested reservations. "Thank you," Tom replied, running a hand along the neck of a magnificent black stallion. "This is quite an operation. Finest bloodlines west of Kentucky. Mrs. Harrington has an eye for quality." As Mackenzie led him through the facilities, explaining their breeding program and training methods, Tom found himself increasingly impressed. Victoria's operation wasn't just wealthy, it was innovative, combining traditional practices with new techniques Tom had only read about. "She's hands-on then?" he asked. "With the ranch operations?" Mackenzie nodded. "Knows every animal by name and lineage, rides out with the hands sometimes. Her father wasn't pleased about it, but she insisted on learning everything." "What was he like, Mr. Harrington?" Something guarded crossed Mackenzie's face. "Stern man. Built everything from nothing. Had definite ideas about how things should be done, especially regarding Miss Victoria." Before Tom could inquire further, a stable boy arrived with a message. He was expected back at the house to prepare for dinner. The foyer of Harrington Heights felt like stepping into another world entirely. Marble floors stretched beneath Tom's worn boots, reflecting light from a crystal chandelier that hung from a ceiling adorned with painted cherubs and clouds. The air smelled of beeswax and something floral he couldn't name, compared to his cabin's perpetual scent of wood smoke and coffee. This perfumed atmosphere made his nostrils flare in adjustment. Jenkins led him through corridors lined with artwork and antiques, whose value Tom couldn't begin to calculate. Each room they passed revealed more opulence. Parlors with velvet furnishings, a music room housing a grand piano, a dining hall that could seat 30 comfortably. "The house dates to 1868, Jenkins offered, noticing Tom's wide-eyed assessment. Mr. Harrington imported many of the fixtures directly from Europe. They arrived at a mahogany door, which Jenkins opened with a slight bow. "Miss Harrington's study. She'll join you momentarily." Tom stepped into a room that, despite its grandeur, showed signs of actual use. Bookshelves climbed to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive desk dominated one end, covered with papers, ledgers, and maps. Wide windows overlooked the eastern pastures, where cattle grazed on grass far greener than any at Whispering Pines. Left alone, Tom felt acutely out of place. Should he sit, stand, touch nothing as Jenkins had warned? He settled for examining a large map of the territory mounted on one wall, noting with surprise that Whispering Pines was marked with a red pin. "You found yourself," came a voice from behind him. Tom turned and for the first time laid eyes on Victoria Harrington. She wasn't at all what the rumors had described. Those who claimed to have seen the reclusive cattle baroness painted her as a harsh, middle-aged spinster who'd driven away every potential suitor. The woman standing before him couldn't be older than 25 or 26. Tall and slender, she wore a high-necked dress of deep burgundy that complemented her auburn hair, which was pulled back in a severe style that emphasized aristocratic features. High cheekbones, a straight nose, full lips currently pressed into a neutral line. But it was her eyes, that captured him completely, a striking green that assessed him with unsettling directness, as if she could read every thought in his head. "Miss Harrington," Tom managed, giving an awkward half-bow. "You're taller than I anticipated," she said, moving to her desk with graceful efficiency. "Please sit." Tom lowered himself into a leather chair, feeling like an intruder despite the invitation. Up close, he noticed details about her: the perfect posture, the absence of jewelry, save for a single pearl pendant, the slight tension around her mouth. "I assume you have questions," she continued, arranging papers before her with delicate, pale hands. "I'll answer what I can, but first, I must confirm you understand this is a business arrangement, not a romantic endeavor." "Yes, ma'am." "Victoria, please, if we're to be married, formalities would seem strange." She didn't smile as she said this. "Now, to address the obvious, why you?" Tom nodded, relieved she'd broached the subject first. "I require a husband immediately for legal reasons. My father's will stipulates that if I am unwed by my 26th birthday, which occurs in 3 days, control of Harrington Holdings transfers to a board of trustees until I marry." Her voice remained calm, but Tom detected a hint of underlying anger. "I have no intention of relinquishing what is rightfully mine. And you chose me because you're educated enough to not embarrass me, poor enough to be motivated, and without family complications. You have a reputation for honesty, if not business acumen, and your failing ranch provides a convenient explanation for our hasty union. People will assume I married you for your land to expand my holdings." She paused. "Does that satisfy your curiosity?" It didn't, not remotely, but Tom sensed pushing further would only harden her reserve. "It's clear enough," he answered instead. "Good. The wedding is tomorrow morning. Judge Bennett will perform the ceremony here with minimal witnesses. You'll be provided suitable attire." She pushed a document across the desk. "This contract outlines our arrangement. 1 year of marriage, during which you will live here and fulfill all public duties. As my husband, private arrangements are separate. Upon completion, you may leave with $20,000 or remain with negotiated terms." Tom stared at the figure. $20,000. More money than he'd see in 3 lifetimes of ranching. "Your current debts will be settled immediately following the ceremony," Victoria continued. "Whispering Pines will receive necessary improvements to become productive again, regardless of your decision to stay or go after our year concludes." "Why not just hire an actor for a day?" Tom asked, the question escaping before he could reconsider. Its wisdom seemed simpler than a year of marriage. To his surprise, something flickered in Victoria's expression. Not anger, but perhaps approval. "The trustees would investigate thoroughly. This must be legally binding and convincing." She gestured to the contract. "Your signature if the if terms are acceptable." Tom hesitated, pen hovering above paper. "What exactly would my duties entail?" "Accompanying me to necessary social functions, managing certain aspects of the ranch operations, maintaining the appearance of a contented marriage." Her voice remained businesslike. "Nothing beyond your capabilities, I assure you." With a deep breath, Tom signed his name, the scratching of the pen against fine paper seeming unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Excellent." Victoria rose, a signal the meeting had concluded. "Jenkins will show you to your quarters. Dinner is at 7. We have much to discuss before tomorrow." At the door, she paused. "One more thing, Mr. Miller." "Yes?" "The east wing of the house is private. Under no circumstances are you to enter it. Understood?" The warning triggered Tom's curiosity immediately, but he nodded. "Understood." Victoria studied him a moment longer, as if weighing his sincerity, then departed with a rustle of expensive fabric, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and something else. something medicinal he couldn't identify. Jenkins reappeared almost immediately. "This way, sir." They climbed the grand staircase to the second floor, where Jenkins led him through a corridor lined with more paintings, landscapes of Montana in various seasons, portraits of severe-looking men and women who shared Victoria's sharp features and penetrating gaze. "The Harrington family has been in Montana since before it was a territory," Jenkins offered, noticing Tom's attention to the portraits. "Mr. Edward Harrington, Miss Victoria's grandfather, established the first cattle operation. Her father, Mr. James Harrington, expanded it tenfold." "And her mother?" Tom asked. Jenkins' expression shuttered slightly. "Mrs. Harrington passed when Miss Victoria was quite young, 12, I believe." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Yes, a tragedy." Jenkins stopped before a door of polished oak. "Your quarters, sir." The room assigned to Tom was larger than his entire cabin. A four-poster bed dominated one wall, its headboard intricately carved with woodland scenes. A sitting area with plush armchairs faced a private fireplace, already lit against the autumn chill. Through one door, he discovered a dressing room already filled with clothing in his size. Through another, a private bathroom with running water, a luxury he'd experienced only in Helena's finest hotel. "How did she know my measurements?" Tom asked, examining a tailored jacket of fine wool. "Miss Harrington is thorough in her preparations," Jenkins replied cryptically. "Will you require assistance dressing for dinner?" Tom almost laughed at the absurdity. "No, thank you. I've been managing buttons alone for some time now." Jenkins didn't smile. "Very good, sir. A bell will sound at 6:30. Please be punctual." Left alone, Tom explored his new accommodations, feeling increasingly like an imposter in someone else's life. The clothing in the dressing room was finer than anything he'd ever owned. Wool suits in various colors, cotton shirts, so crisp they practically stood on their own, silk ties, polished boots, even smoking jackets for evening wear. Running his hand over the bed's coverlet, he discovered it was softer than any fabric he'd ever touched. He moved to the window and gazed out at Harrington Heights. From this vantage point, he could see the operation's vastness. Countless acres of grazing land, barns and outbuildings, workers' quarters, and in the distance, the glint of Ruby River winding through property that seemed to stretch to the horizon. What kind of woman built and maintained all this alone? And why, with all her resources, would she choose a failing rancher as her husband, even temporarily? His father's watch showed nearly 5 o'clock. With time before dinner, Tom decided to clean up after his journey. The bathroom revealed more. Surprises, hot running water, scented soaps, towels so thick they could double as blankets. He bathed thoroughly, scrubbing away the dust of whispering pines, and shaved using a straight razor left for his use. Looking in the mirror afterward, he hardly recognized himself. Without the layer of trail dust and worry, he appeared younger, though his eyes still carried the weight of recent years. He selected the simplest of the evening clothes provided, a dark blue suit with a white shirt and silver tie, and did his best to tame his dark hair, which curled stubbornly when clean. The dinner bell sounded precisely at 6:30. Tom made his way downstairs, following a footman's directions to the dining room, a cavernous space with a table that could have seated 30. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over settings of fine china and silver. Victoria awaited him, now dressed in a gown of deep green that matched her eyes. "You clean up well, Mr. Miller," she observed as he entered. "The facilities help," he replied. Victoria gestured to a chair at her right hand, rather than at the distant opposite end of the enormous table. "We'll dispense with formality tonight. There's too much to discuss before tomorrow." A parade of servants presented course after course, soup, fish, roast beef, vegetables prepared in ways Tom didn't recognize, desserts he couldn't name. He watched Victoria for cues on which utensil to use, increasingly aware of his inadequacies in this world of wealth and protocol. Noting his hesitation before a particularly complex arrangement of silverware, Victoria remarked, "Start from the outside and work your way in." "It seems like a lot of metal to get food to your mouth," Tom observed, attempting to lighten the atmosphere. Victoria didn't smile, but her posture relaxed slightly. "Unnecessary complexity is the hallmark of wealth, Mr. Miller. Form over function." "Tom," he corrected, "if we're to be married." "Tom," she conceded, taking a sip of wine from a crystal glass that caught the light like a prism. Throughout the meal, she briefed him on what to expect the following day: the ceremony, the legal proceedings, the few witnesses who would attend. Tom listened, feeling increasingly that he'd stepped into a stage play without learning his lines. "There will be rumors," Victoria warned, her tone matter-of-fact. "Pinecrest Valley thrives on gossip, and our sudden marriage will provide ample material. We must present a unified front." "What's our story?" Tom asked. "How did the wealthiest woman in the territory come to marry the poorest rancher?" For the first time, Victoria's lips curved in what might have been a smile. "We'll keep it simple. A chance meeting in Helena last spring. A whirlwind courtship conducted primarily through correspondence. A mutual love of the land." No one will believe that. They don't need to believe it. They only need to repeat it until something more interesting comes along. She set down her wine glass. "Do you dance, Tom?" The question caught him off guard. "Not since school socials." "We'll need to remedy that. The Founders' Day celebration is in 2 weeks. As my husband, you'll be expected to open the dancing with me." Tom's dismay must have shown on his face, because Victoria added, "Don't worry, I lead quite well." After dinner, Victoria retired immediately, claiming preparations for the morning required her attention. Tom found himself at loose ends, with an entire mansion at his disposal, yet feeling entirely out of place. Declining Jenkins' offer of brandy in the library, he returned to his room, intending to retire early. But sleep proved elusive. The bed, for all its luxury, felt strange after years on his simple cot at Whispering Pines. The silence of Harrington Heights, no creaking boards, no wind through poorly sealed windows, no distant coyotes, was oddly disturbing. After an hour of restless tossing, he rose, pulled on a robe from the dressing room, and decided to explore. The corridors were dimly lit by gas lamps turned low for the night. Tom moved quietly, conscious of his status as neither guest nor true resident. He found his way back to the main staircase and descended to the first floor, drawn by a faint light coming from a room he hadn't seen during Jenkins' tour. It was a small study, more intimate than Victoria's formal office. A single lamp burned on a writing desk, illuminating walls lined with books more worn than the pristine volumes in the main library. Curious, Tom examined the titles: novels, poetry collections, scientific journals, books on agriculture and animal husbandry. Many bore evidence of frequent reading: cracked spines, dog-eared pages, occasional annotations in a delicate hand. On the desk sat a sketchbook, open to a half-finished drawing of the view from the terrace, executed with surprising sensitivity and skill. Beside it lay several letters, their envelopes addressed in different handwriting to Tory, a familiar diminutive he couldn't imagine applied to the formal woman he'd met. "Those areas are not off-limits, but I would appreciate privacy in my personal pursuits." Tom turned to find Victoria in the doorway, now dressed in a simpler gown of deep blue. Her hair had been released from its severe style and fell in copper waves past her shoulders, transforming her appearance entirely. Without the formal attire and rigid posture, she seemed younger, almost approachable. "I apologize," Tom said, closing the sketchbook. I couldn't sleep. I was just curious, understandable. She moved into the room. Tomorrow changes everything, Mr. Miller. Are you prepared for that? No, he answered honestly. But I haven't been prepared for much of anything since my parents died. Something in her expression softened momentarily. That makes two of us then. She reached for a book on a nearby shelf, a volume on cattle breeding. You should know that while our marriage may be a business arrangement, I expect loyalty. Whatever you learn about me, about this house, remains private. Of course. Good night, then. She moved toward the door, then paused. Jenkins tells me you declined assistance dressing. Most men in your position would have embraced every luxury offered. Tom shrugged. Most men in my position wouldn't be here at all. This time, Victoria's smile was unmistakable, if fleeting. Perhaps I chose better than I realized. Sleep well, Tom Miller. Tomorrow everything changes. She disappeared into the darkened hallway, leaving Tom to wonder which version was the real Victoria Harrington, the cold businesswoman from their meeting, or this more human figure with copper hair and hidden talents. Morning arrived with surprising speed. Tom was awakened by a gentle knock at precisely 7 o'clock. A manservant who introduced himself as Parker entered bearing a breakfast tray and news that the ceremony would take place at 10. Miss Harrington thought you might prefer to eat privately this morning, sir, Parker explained, setting down a tray laden with eggs, bacon, toast and coffee that smelled infinitely better than Tom's usual brew. She asked me to inform you that your wedding attire has been prepared in the dressing room. After breakfast, Tom bathed again, marveling at the luxury of unlimited hot water. He found the promised wedding clothes, a suit of charcoal grey wool with a silver waistcoat and tie, a crisp white shirt and leather boots polished to a mirror shine. Miss Harrington selected the colors herself, Parker informed him upon returning. She said they would complement your eyes. Tom stared at his reflection in the mirror. The man who looked back seemed a stranger, clean, polished, wrapped in finery. Only his hands, still calloused from years of ranch work, betrayed his true identity. Will there be anything else, sir? Parker asked. Tom fingered the old watch in his pocket, his father's prized possession, the only item of value he'd brought. From Whispering Pines. No, thank you. At precisely 9:30, Jenkins arrived to escort him to the conservatory where the ceremony would take place. The glass-enclosed space at the rear of the mansion was filled with plants and flowers Tom couldn't name, creating an atmosphere of perpetual spring despite the autumn chill outside. Judge Bennett awaited them, a portly man with shrewd eyes who greeted Tom with a firm handshake and a measuring look. The witnesses consisted of Jenkins, Victoria's lawyer Mr. Thornton, and to Tom's surprise, Silas Cooper. Couldn't let you do this alone, boy, the old ranch hand whispered when Tom approached him. Silas wore a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit his lean frame, but his weathered face carried a dignity no fine clothing could improve. Ryder came for me at dawn, said the lady herself requested my presence. Before Tom could respond, the conservatory doors opened. Victoria appeared precisely at 10, wearing a dress of ivory silk trimmed with lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hair was arranged in an elegant coil, adorned with small white flowers that matched those blooming around them. She wore no jewelry, except the pearl pendant he'd noticed the day before, its simple elegance more striking than any diamond. The ceremony was brief, the words familiar, yet strange in this context. Tom repeated his vows in a steady voice, surprised by his own calmness. When he slipped the gold band onto Victoria's finger, a ring he'd been provided that morning, he noticed her hand trembled slightly. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Bennett declared. "You may kiss the bride." This detail hadn't been discussed in their arrangements. Tom hesitated, looking to Victoria for guidance. Her green eyes met his, challenging. He leaned forward and pressed his lips briefly to hers. A chaste kiss that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through him. Her lips were soft, faintly scented, with something floral, and for a moment, just a moment, he felt them yield against his. Then it was over, and the businesslike atmosphere resumed as if nothing had interrupted it. What followed was a flurry of paperwork. Tom signed his name on countless documents, aware that with each signature, his life changed irrevocably. Banknotes were produced showing the settlement of his debts. Deeds were modified. A substantial account was established in his name at the Pinecrest Valley Bank. Throughout it all, Victoria remained composed, answering questions with precision, directing the proceedings with quiet authority. Only once did her control slip when Thornton referenced a specific clause in her father's will. "The matter is settled," she said sharply, cutting him off. "The required conditions have been met." By afternoon, the judge and lawyer had departed. Silas, after awkwardly congratulating the newlyweds, returned to Whispering Pines with promises that a crew would arrive the following day to begin improvements on the property. Jenkins had arranged a small luncheon in the dining room, which Tom and Victoria ate in relative silence, each seemingly absorbed in private thoughts. "I've taken the liberty of arranging a small dinner party this evening," Victoria informed Tom as they finished. "The most influential families in the county. Better to introduce you immediately than allow speculation to fester." "As you wish," Tom replied, still processing the morning's events. "Until then, you're free to explore the grounds. The stables might interest you. The foreman, Mackenzie, has been instructed to show you our breeding operation." She started toward the door, then turned back. "I never asked if you ride." Tom almost laughed. "Since before I could walk." "Good. We'll ride out together tomorrow morning. I should show my new husband his expanded holdings." With that, she departed, leaving Tom to contemplate his strange new reality. Tom decided to take her suggestion and visit the stables. The brisk autumn air cleared his head as he walked the manicured paths of Harrington Heights. Unlike his neglected acreage at Whispering Pines, every inch of Victoria's property showed evidence of careful management. Fences perfectly maintained, outbuildings freshly painted, cattle fat and content. In verdant pastures, the stables themselves were a revelation. 50 thoroughbred horses housed in conditions better than most people lived in. Clean straw bedding, fresh water in copper buckets, grain of obviously premium quality. Mackenzie, a weathered Scotsman with a perpetual squint, greeted Tom with cautious respect. "Congratulations on your marriage, sir," he said, though his tone suggested reservations about the sudden union. "Thank you," Tom replied, running a hand along the neck of a magnificent black stallion that watched him with intelligent eyes. "This is quite an operation. Finest bloodlines west of Kentucky. Mrs. Harrington has an eye for quality." As Mackenzie led him through the facilities, explaining their breeding program and training methods, Tom found himself increasingly impressed. Victoria's operation wasn't just wealthy, it was innovative, combining traditional practices with new techniques Tom had only read about in agricultural journals he couldn't afford to subscribe to. "She's hands-on then?" he asked. "With the ranch operations?" Mackenzie nodded. "Knows every animal by name and lineage, rides out with the hands sometimes. Her father wasn't pleased about it, but she insisted on learning everything." "What was he like? Mr. Harrington?" Something guarded crossed Mackenzie's face. "Stern man. Built everything from nothing. Had definite ideas about how things should be done, especially regarding Miss Victoria." Before Tom could inquire further, a stable boy arrived with a message. He was expected back at the house to prepare for dinner. As he walked back through the gardens, Tom noticed a secluded path branching away from the main route. Curious, he followed it around a high hedge to discover a small private garden, unlike the formal arrangements elsewhere on the property. Here, wildflowers grew in seemingly haphazard profusion alongside herbs and vegetables. A kitchen garden, but with a whimsical quality at odds with the rigid precision of Harrington Heights. At its center stood a simple stone bench beside a small pond. Sitting on the bench was a young woman Tom hadn't seen before, perhaps 16 or 17, with blonde hair and a plain dress. She was feeding breadcrumbs to colorful fish that darted just beneath the water's surface. She looked up as Tom approached, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness. "I'm sorry," Tom said, stopping several paces away. "I didn't mean to intrude." The girl studied him, blue eyes assessing. "You're him, aren't you? The new husband?" "Tom Miller, yes." Her gaze flicked to his fine clothes, then back to his face. "I'm Lucy. I help in the kitchen." "Pleased to meet you, Lucy." She returned to feeding the fish, though Tom sensed her attention remained fixed on him. "This is Miss Victoria's garden," she offered after a moment. "She lets me tend it sometimes." "It's beautiful," Tom said honestly. "Different from the rest of the grounds." "Miss Victoria likes order in public and wilderness in private," Lucy replied with surprising insight. Then, as if realizing she'd spoken too freely, she rose quickly. "I should get back to my duties. Mrs. Jenkins will be looking for me." "Of course." As she passed him, Lucy paused. "Be careful in the east wing, Mr. Miller." Before he could respond, she hurried away down the path, leaving Tom with more questions than answers. He returned to the mansion to prepare for dinner, finding Parker already laying out evening attire, a black tailcoat, waistcoat and tie that made Tom feel like he was dressing for his own funeral rather than his wedding celebration. As the manservant helped him navigate the complicated formal wear, Tom ventured a question. "Parker, what's in the east wing?" The servant's hands stilled momentarily as he adjusted Tom's collar. "I couldn't say, sir." "You couldn't say, or you've been told not to say?" Parker's eyes met his briefly in the mirror, then looked away. "Mrs. Harrington values her privacy, sir. It would not be my place to speculate on matters she considers personal." Tom decided not to press further. "I understand. Thank you." By 7 o'clock, Tom waited at the bottom of the grand staircase as Jenkins had instructed, increasingly uncomfortable in his formal attire despite its perfect fit. The first guests had already arrived, a judge and his wife from Helena, the banker from Pinecrest Valley, and his daughter, the owner of a neighboring ranch, and his sons. Tom greeted them with the manners his mother had instilled in him, aware of their curious, assessing glances. Victoria descended the stairs precisely on time, a vision in deep burgundy silk that complemented her auburn hair, which was now arranged in an elaborate style adorned with pearls. Around her neck lay a single strand of matched pearls, their soft luster emphasizing the creaminess of her skin. She moved with practiced grace, smiling politely at their guests. "My wife," Tom said as she reached him, offering his arm as Parker had instructed. "My husband," she returned, her hand light on his sleeve as she leaned close enough to whisper, "Remember our story and let me lead the conversation." The dining room had been transformed since their simple luncheon. The long table now gleamed with silver, crystal and china under the light of dozens of candles. Floral arrangements scented the air. Servants stood at attention, ready to attend to the slightest need. Victoria seated Tom at the head of the table, taking her place at the opposite end. As the meal progressed through multiple courses, she orchestrated the conversation with subtle skill, deflecting two direct questions about their whirlwind romance, emphasizing Tom's knowledge of cattle ranching, presenting their union as a natural alliance of compatible interests. Tom followed her lead, offering brief, honest answers about his background, while omitting the desperate circumstances that had brought him to Harrington Heights. He found himself warming to the role of new husband, particularly when he caught Victoria watching him with what might have been approval as he discussed breeding techniques with the neighboring rancher. After dinner, the party retired to the drawing room for brandy and coffee. Tom circulated as instructed, careful to maintain the appearance of a man comfortable in his new position while avoiding topics that might reveal his ignorance of high society. When one of the banker's associates cornered him with questions about his sudden appearance in Victoria's life, Tom simply smiled. "Some connections are forged quickly," he said, repeating a line Victoria had suggested. "When you know, you know." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Tom found himself increasingly anxious about what would follow. The wedding night. They hadn't discussed these most private arrangements, and he had no idea what Victoria expected of him. Once they were truly alone, the last guests departed near midnight. Victoria, displaying no fatigue despite the long day, instructed Jenkins to ensure the house was secured for the night. Then she turned to Tom. "A word in the library, if you don't mind." He followed her to the book-lined room where a fire still burned in the grate. Victoria closed the door behind them, then moved to a cabinet and withdrew a decanter of amber liquid. "Brandy," she offered, pouring herself a small measure. "Please." She handed him a crystal glass, then gestured to the chairs before the fire. Once seated, she studied him over the rim of her glass. "You managed well this evening. Better than I anticipated." "Thank you, I think." "It was a compliment." She sipped her brandy. "Now about tonight's sleeping arrangements." Tom felt heat rise in his face despite his best efforts. "I assumed you have your room, I have mine," Victoria stated plainly. "This is a marriage. Of convenience, not passion. However," she continued, setting down her glass, "appearances must be maintained. The servants talk. Therefore, you will come to my quarters briefly each night and leave each morning, creating the impression of a normal marriage." Tom nodded, relieved yet strangely disappointed. "I understand." "Good." Victoria rose. "It's been a long day. Shall we?" Tom followed her up the grand staircase to the second floor, then down a corridor he hadn't yet explored. Victoria's rooms occupied the southern corner of the mansion, with windows overlooking both the formal gardens and the distant mountains. The sitting room they entered was elegantly appointed in shades of green and gold, with feminine touches, embroidered cushions, fresh flowers, a delicate writing desk that seemed at odds with the businesswoman he'd come to know. Victoria moved to an inner door. "My bedroom is through here. You'll enter each evening around 10 and leave after the household is stirring but before breakfast is served. During the day, you'll use your own quarters for changing and personal matters." "As you wish," Tom agreed. She studied him a moment longer, her expression unreadable in the lamplight. "Good night, then." "Good night, Bee." "Wife," Tom replied, testing the word. Victoria's lips curved slightly. "Husband," she acknowledged, then disappeared through the bedroom door, leaving Tom to find his way back to his solitary room, pondering the strange day that had transformed him from a failing rancher to the husband of the wealthiest woman in the territory. Sleep came easier than he expected, the emotional and social exhaustion of the day finally catching up with him. As consciousness faded, he found himself thinking of Victoria's brief smile, the momentary warmth of her lips against his during their wedding, and the mysteries of Harrington Heights that still awaited his discovery. It was the sound of the lock turning in the east wing that woke him in the darkest hours before dawn. Tom sat upright in bed, heart hammering against his ribs. The sound had been distinct, a lock turning, followed by the soft click of a door closing. He strained his ears in the darkness, trying to determine if he'd dreamed it. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 3 times. its resonant tones seeming unnaturally loud in the sleeping house. After several minutes of silence, curiosity overcame caution. Tom slipped from beneath the luxurious bed covers and pulled on the robe left at the foot of his bed. The floor was cold beneath his bare feet as he moved to his door and opened it just enough to peer into the corridor. A faint light flickered at the far end, not the steady glow of the gas lamps, but the dancing illumination of a candle or lantern. As his eyes adjusted, he could make out a figure moving away from him, toward the forbidden east wing. The silhouette was unmistakably feminine, with copper hair gleaming in the candlelight. Victoria. Tom hesitated, recalling her explicit instructions to avoid the east wing. But something in her manner, furtive, almost vulnerable, stirred both his concern and his curiosity. Before he could reconsider, he was following, keeping to the shadows, careful to avoid the creaking floorboards he'd noted earlier. Victoria paused at the east wing's entrance, a heavy oak door with iron fittings that looked more appropriate for a fortress than a family home. She produced a key from her dressing gown pocket, unlocked the door, and slipped inside. The door closed behind her with a soft thud. Tom approached cautiously, aware he was violating their agreement on his first night as her husband. He pressed his ear against the wood, but it was too thick to transmit any sound from within. The keyhole, however, offered a narrow view into the forbidden wing. What he saw made little sense at first. Victoria moved through a corridor, much different from the opulent halls of the main house. Here the walls were whitewashed and unadorned. The floors were bare wood rather than polished marble or carpeted luxury. The only furniture visible was a simple table bearing a basin and pitcher. It resembled nothing so much as a hospital ward. Victoria disappeared through another door at the corridor's end. Tom straightened, troubled by what he'd seen, yet more curious than ever. He waited nearly an hour, hidden in an alcove across from the east wing entrance, but Victoria didn't emerge. Finally, cold and increasingly aware of his precarious position, if discovered, he returned to his room. Sleep eluded him for the remainder of the night. As dawn approached, Tom dressed in casual clothes from his new wardrobe and made his way downstairs, hoping an early exploration might yield answers about his mysterious bride and her secretive behavior. The house was just awakening. Maids moved quietly through the rooms, lighting fires and dusting surfaces. In the kitchen, he found a flurry of activity as breakfast preparations began under the watchful eye of Mrs. Jenkins, the housekeeper and wife of the butler. "Mr. Miller," she exclaimed, clearly startled by his presence in her domain. "We weren't expecting you so early. Breakfast won't be served for another hour." "I'm an early riser," Tom explained with a smile he hoped appeared casual. "Ranch habits. Die hard. I was hoping for just a cup of coffee to start." Mrs. Jenkins softened slightly. "Of course, sir. Lucy, bring Mr. Miller coffee in the morning room." The girl Tom had met in the garden the previous day appeared from the pantry, carrying a basket of fresh eggs. She curtsied awkwardly, her eyes widening in recognition. "Right away, Mrs. Jenkins." Tom followed directions to the morning room, a pleasant space facing east to catch the sunrise. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the formal gardens, now glistening with dew. He had just settled into a comfortable chair when Lucy appeared with a silver tray bearing coffee, cream, and sugar. As she set it before him, Tom noticed her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, Lucy." She nodded, turning to leave, but Tom stopped her. "A moment, please. I was wondering if you might answer a question." Lucy glanced toward the door nervously. "I shouldn't, sir. Mrs. Jenkins doesn't approve of staff chatting with the family." "Just one quick question," Tom pressed. "About the East Wing." The color drained from Lucy's face. "I can't talk about that, sir. None of us can." "Why not?" "It's not my place." Lucy backed toward the door. "Begging your pardon, Mr. Miller, But if you want to stay happy in this house, you won't ask about the East Wing again." Before Tom could respond, she fled, leaving him more puzzled than before. He poured his coffee and watched the sun climb over the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns. What secret was Victoria hiding that inspired such fear in her staff? His reverie was interrupted by the arrival of Jenkins, as precisely groomed as the previous day, despite the early hour. "Good morning, sir. I trust you slept well." "Well enough," Tom replied. "What time does Mrs. Harrington usually come down for breakfast?" "Mrs. Harrington takes breakfast in her rooms at 8 o'clock, Jenkins informed him. "She asked me to remind you of your riding appointment at 9. Mackenzie will have horses ready at the main stable." "Thank you, Jenkins." After a solitary breakfast served with military precision by silent footmen, Tom made his way to the stables. The morning was brisk but clear, typical Montana autumn weather that hinted at the harsh winter to come. He found Mackenzie waiting with 2 saddled horses, a magnificent black stallion and a chestnut mare with a white blaze. "Morning, Mr. Miller," the Scotsman greeted him. "Mrs. Harrington thought you might appreciate midnight here." He patted the stallion's gleaming neck. "Best jumper in the stable if you've a mind for it." Tom approached the horse, allowing it to catch his scent before stroking its velvety nose. "He's magnificent." "Aye, and knows it too. Bit spirited for most riders, but the mistress thought you'd manage him fine." Tom was checking the saddle girth when Victoria arrived, dressed in a riding habit of deep blue that hugged her slender form more revealingly than her usual attire. Her hair was braided and coiled at the nape of her neck, and she wore a small hat with a veil that shielded her eyes from the morning sun. "You're punctual," she observed. "Another point in your favor." Tom assisted her onto the chestnut mare, noting the easy grace with which she mounted. She was clearly an accomplished rider, settling into the side saddle with practiced confidence. "I thought we'd ride the north boundary this morning," Victoria said as they set off. "It adjoins your property, or should I say, our property now." They rode in silence for the first mile, following a well-maintained trail through stands of pine and aspen just beginning to turn golden with the season. Midnight proved as spirited as Mackenzie had warned, testing Tom's horsemanship with occasional sidesteps and attempts to quicken the pace, but Tom kept him well in hand. Victoria watched this battle of wills with apparent interest. "You ride well," she acknowledged finally. "Most men would have allowed him to run by now." "Most men would regret it," Tom replied. "He needs to understand who's in charge." A ghost of a smile touched Victoria's lips. Indeed. As they crested a hill, the landscape opened before them, rolling grasslands stretching toward distant mountains, bisected by the silver ribbon of Ruby River. Cattle grazed in fenced pastures, fat and healthy compared to Tom's struggling herd at Whispering Pines. Victoria reined in her mare, gesturing toward the panorama. Harrington Land extends to the river and 3 miles beyond it to the north. Everything you see, from the eastern ridge to those twin peaks in the west, is part of my father's legacy. "It's impressive," Tom acknowledged. "It's more than impressive. It's power." Victoria's tone hardened slightly. "This land feeds half the territory. The railroad pays premium prices for rights of way. The water rights alone are worth a fortune." She turned in her saddle to face him directly. "Do you understand now why I couldn't allow my father's trustees to take control?" "I'm beginning to." They continued riding, Victoria pointing out landmarks and explaining operations with the precision of someone intimately familiar with every aspect of the business. Tom listened attentively, impressed despite himself by her knowledge of cattle, breeding, water management, and market fluctuations. "Your father taught you well," he observed as they paused to water the horses at a stream. Victoria's expression closed. "My father taught me nothing. He believed women had no place in business, Everything I know, I learned by observation, by reading his journals when he was away, by questioning the foreman when my father was too drunk to notice. The bitterness in her voice surprised Tom. Then you've built something remarkable on your own. Built and improved, she corrected, her chin lifting slightly. The ranch was profitable under my father. It's thriving under my management. They remounted and continued along the boundary line. As they approached a rise overlooking whispering pines, Tom felt a pang of emotion at the sight of his struggling ranch. From this vantage point, its shortcomings were painfully apparent. Fences sagging, outbuildings in disrepair, grazing land overgrazed in some sections and underutilized in others. Victoria followed his gaze. Your parents had vision, choosing that land. The water table is excellent, and the southern exposure extends the growing season. They were immigrants with dreams larger than their pocketbook, Tom said quietly. The drought took whatever chance they had of making it work. The drought affected everyone, Victoria pointed out. Poor management exacerbated the problem. Tom bristled at the criticism of his parents. They did their best with what they had. I'm not questioning their effort, only their approach. Victoria's tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. The crews I'm sending will implement irrigation systems similar to what we use here. The soil is good. It just needs consistent water and proper rotation. They watched as a lone figure, Silas, emerged from the barn below, leading a horse to the corral. Even at this distance, Tom could see the animal's ribs. I promised him things would improve, Tom said, more to himself than Victoria. And they will, she replied. I keep my promises, Mr. Miller. Whispering Pines will be productive again within a year. They turned their horses homeward, taking a different route that led them through a stand of cottonwoods where a small cemetery occupied a peaceful clearing. Victoria slowed her mare as they approached, her expression softening for the first time that morning. My mother, she said simply, indicating a marble headstone more elaborate than its neighbors. And here, my brother James. Tom hadn't realized she'd had siblings. The second headstone was smaller, the dates indicating a life of only 5 years. Ended 2 decades ago. I'm sorry, he offered, knowing the inadequacy of the words. Victoria didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the graves. She died when I was 12. Consumption. My father never recovered from losing her. She straightened in her saddle. We should return. The trustees are arriving at noon to review the marriage documents. They rode back to the mansion in silence, Tom's mind filled with new questions about his enigmatic bride. The glimpses of humanity beneath her businesslike exterior intrigued him more than he cared to admit. At the stables, as stable boys took their horses, Victoria paused. You should know that Philip Montgomery will be among the trustees today. He was an associate of my father's and has made no secret of his displeasure at being denied control of Harrington Holdings. Should I expect trouble? Not openly, but he will look for any reason to invalidate our arrangement. Her green eyes held his steadily. Whatever personal opinions you may be forming about me, Mr. Miller, I need you to present a united front today. Of course, Tom assured her. I understand the stakes. Victoria nodded once, then turned toward the house. Jenkins will show you to the library at noon. Wear the blue suit laid out in your dressing room. The trustees gathered in Victoria's study promptly at noon. 5 men in expensive suits, their expressions ranging from bored to openly suspicious, as Jenkins introduced Tom. Philip Montgomery stood apart from the others, a tall man with silver at his temples and cold blue eyes that assessed Tom with unconcealed disdain. Gentlemen, Victoria greeted them, entering from a side door. She wore a formal day dress of deep green that emphasized her authority, her hair once again arranged in its severe style. I believe you've met my unexpected development, Victoria. Your father would be surprised by your choice. My father stipulated marriage, not approval of my selection, she replied coolly. Now, shall we proceed? I'm sure you're all busy men. The meeting that followed was an exercise in barely concealed hostility. The trustees reviewed the marriage certificate, questioning Judge Bennett about the ceremony's legitimacy. They examined the contract between Tom and Victoria with the scrutiny of men looking for loopholes. Throughout it all, Victoria remained composed, answering questions directly and referring to Tom with a familiarity that suggested genuine affection. For his part, Tom maintained the role of devoted husband, standing beside Victoria's chair, occasionally touching her shoulder in a gesture of support that felt surprisingly natural. When Montgomery implied that the marriage was merely a legal fiction, Tom responded with a firmness that wasn't entirely feigned. Mr. Montgomery, I understand your concern for Mrs. Harrington's welfare, but I assure you, our union may have been swift, but it is both legal and genuine. Victoria and I share a vision for the future of Harrington Holdings that her father would have respected. Montgomery's eyes narrowed. Bold words from a man whose own ranch is on the verge of bankruptcy. Philip, Victoria interjected sharply, my husband's management of Harrington affairs is not the subject of today's meeting. The will specified only that I be married before my 26th birthday. That condition has been met. Your approval is neither required nor solicited. After another hour of increasingly circular discussion, the trustees grudgingly acknowledged that the marriage fulfilled the legal requirements of James Harrington's will. Victoria would retain full control of Harrington Holdings, with Tom as her legal partner in the enterprise. As the men gathered their papers to leave, Montgomery lingered behind. A word in private, Victoria? She glanced at Tom, then nodded. Tom, would you ask Jenkins to bring tea to the conservatory? I'll join you shortly. Tom hesitated, reluctant to leave her alone with the man whose hostility was palpable. But Victoria's slight nod reassured him. He departed, closing the study door behind him, but remained in the hallway, positioned to overhear their conversation. What game are you playing, Victoria? Montgomery's voice carried clearly, despite his lowered tone. This marriage is transparent. The man is a nobody, a failed rancher with nothing to offer except his name on a certificate. My choice of husband is not your concern, Philip. It becomes my concern when you threaten everything your father built. James trusted me to protect his legacy, and you. Victoria's laugh held no humor. My father trusted you to control me, Philip. There's a distinction. Be reasonable. This arrangement can't possibly last. When it inevitably fails, the trustees will step in. Why not avoid the humiliation and work with us now? I could make this transition painless. The way you made my father's final years painless. Victoria's voice had dropped to a dangerous softness. I haven't forgotten who supplied him with whiskey when the doctors forbade it, who encouraged his worst tendencies after Mother died. You're still that stubborn child, seeing conspiracies where there was only friendship. Get out of my house, Philip. The legal requirements have been met. Our business is concluded. Tom retreated quickly as the study door opened. Montgomery emerged, his face flushed with anger. He strode past without acknowledging Tom, barking for his hat and coat as Jenkins appeared from the foyer. Victoria followed moments later, her composure intact, but a tightness around her eyes betraying her tension. She spotted Tom waiting and approached, adjusting a loose strand of hair with fingers that trembled slightly. You heard, she stated, not a question. Some, Tom admitted. He seems to have a personal stake in controlling Harrington Holdings. Philip Montgomery was my father's closest friend and business partner for 20 years. He expected to inherit control when father died, either directly or through manipulating me into marriage. Her voice was steady but cold. He underestimated my determination. And now he'll look for ways to break our arrangement, to prove the marriage invalid or force dissolution of it through other means. Victoria's gaze met his directly. You should be on your guard, Tom. Philip rarely accepts defeat gracefully. They walked together to the conservatory where Jenkins had arranged tea. As they settled into wicker chairs surrounded by blooming tropical plants, Tom studied his bride's profile. In just 24 hours, he'd seen multiple facets of Victoria. Harrington, the shrewd businesswoman, the vulnerable daughter by her mother's grave, the determined heiress facing down her father's associates. Each glimpse made her more intriguing, more human than the cold persona she presented to the world. Thank you, Victoria said suddenly, interrupting his thoughts. You handled yourself well with the trustees, particularly with Philip. I just spoke the truth. Our arrangement is legal and it is based on a shared vision, at least for the prosperity of both properties. Victoria's lips curved slightly. A diplomatic answer. You're more adept at this than I expected. I'm full of surprises, Tom replied lightly. Indeed. Victoria poured tea with practiced elegance. Speaking of surprises, I received word that your friend Silas has agreed to oversee the improvements at Whispering Pines. The first crew arrives tomorrow. Tom's eyebrows rose. You consulted Silas? I consulted the most knowledgeable person about your property. Mr. Cooper has been managing that land longer than you've been alive. His insight is valuable. Silas is family, Tom said quietly. He stayed when he could have found better paying work elsewhere. Looked after my parents when they were sick. Taught me everything I know about ranching. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Loyalty is rare and worth rewarding. I've arranged for his quarters to be improved first, and his salary has been adjusted to reflect his new responsibilities. Tom felt a surge of gratitude that surprised him. Thank you. That means more than you know. Something shifted in Victoria's expression, a softening around her eyes, a momentary vulnerability quickly masked. It's a sound business decision, nothing more. But Tom suspected it was something more, a gesture of understanding, perhaps, even kindness, from a woman who seemed determined to present herself as purely pragmatic. As afternoon faded into evening, Tom found himself once again preparing for a social occasion, this time the formal dinner Victoria had arranged to introduce him to Pinecrest Valley society. Parker helped him into evening attire even more elaborate than the previous nights, explaining the subtle distinctions of formal wear that Tom had never needed to know on his ranch. Mrs. Harrington is particular about appearances, Parker noted as he adjusted Tom's tie. The Pinecrest Valley ladies have been speculating about her for years. Tonight will feed their gossip mills for months to come. What do they say about her? Tom asked, curious about his wife's reputation. Parker hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing his employer. It's not my place to repeat rumors, sir. I'm not asking for rumors, just context. I'm walking into a room full of people who've known my wife for years. I'd prefer not to appear completely ignorant. The valet relented slightly. Mrs. Harrington is respected, sir, but not beloved. She keeps to herself, participates in community affairs only as business requires. The ladies find her standoffish. The gentlemen find her intimidating. He straightened Tom's lapels. There was talk after her father died that she might marry Philip Montgomery. He certainly seemed to expect it. And Victoria, did she encourage those expectations? Not that anyone observed, sir. But Mr. Montgomery was a frequent visitor until about a year ago. Then, quite suddenly, he was no longer welcome at Harrington Heights. This new information added another layer to the complex picture of Victoria that was forming in Tom's mind. What had happened to sever her relationship with her father's friend and business partner? And what connection did it have to the mysterious East Wing and Victoria's nocturnal visits there? The dinner party that evening was larger than the previous night's gathering. 20 of Pinecrest Valley's most prominent citizens, dressed in their finest and clearly curious about the sudden marriage of their wealthiest neighbor to a struggling rancher they barely knew. Tom stood beside Victoria in the drawing room as Jenkins announced each arriving guest, trying to memorize names and connections as Victoria murmured brief biographical details between greetings. "Martha Prescott," she whispered as a plump woman in an over-decorated gown approached. "Husband owns the mercantile, biggest gossip in 3 counties, be charming but reveal nothing." Tom performed his role admirably, deflecting direct questions about their whirlwind courtship with self-deprecating humor and genuine praise for Victoria's business acumen. He found himself warming to the task, enjoying the surprised approval in Victoria's eyes when he handled a particularly probing inquiry with grace. During dinner, he was seated at the opposite end of the table from his wife, surrounded by curious neighbors, eager to learn more about the man who had captured Victoria Harrington's apparently cold heart. Tom maintained their agreed-upon story, while revealing enough of his actual background to seem forthcoming. "I've known of Mrs. Harrington's operation for years, of course," he told the banker's wife seated beside him. "Any rancher in Montana would admire what she's built, but our paths never crossed until that cattle auction in Helena last spring." "And it was love at first sight?" the woman asked, skepticism evident in her tone. Tom smiled, remembering Victoria's genuine passion when discussing her breeding programs that morning. "Let's say it was respect at first sight. The love grew as we corresponded, and I came to know her better." Across the table, Martha Prescott leaned forward. "You must have been quite the letter writer, Mr. Miller. Victoria has refused every eligible bachelor in the territory for years. Some of us wondered if she'd ever marry." "Some people are worth waiting for," Tom replied smoothly, raising his glass in a silent toast to Victoria, who acknowledged it with a slight nod from her end of the table. After dinner, the men retired to the library for brandy and cigars, while the ladies gathered in the drawing room. Tom found himself the center of attention as Pinecrest Valley's leading men assessed the newcomer to their social circle. Judge Bennett, who had performed their wedding ceremony, seemed particularly interested in Tom's background. "I understand your parents came from Germany, Miller." "My father was German, my mother Irish," Tom confirmed. "They met in New York, worked there until they'd saved enough to buy land out west. Admirable, the immigrant's tale." Bennett sipped his brandy. "And now you find yourself married to the wealthiest woman in Montana Territory. Quite a change in circumstances." The implication was clear, but Tom refused to rise to the bait. "Fortune has been kind, though not always in the ways we expect. Victoria and I share common goals for the future of both our properties." Montgomery, who had been silent until now, laughed sharply. "Goals! The boy speaks as if he understands the cattle business. Tell me, Miller, what was your herd count before the drought? 20 head? 30? Victoria manages thousands." "Philip," cautioned another man, "the fellow's new to our circle. No need for interrogation." "I'm merely curious about Mrs. Harrington's sudden change in standards," Montgomery persisted. "After all, she rejected offers from established ranchers, bankers, even that railroad magnate from Chicago. Yet here stands Mr. Miller, whose only qualification seems to be a handsome face and convenient financial troubles." The room fell silent, the challenge hanging in the air. Tom set down his glass carefully, aware that his response would establish his position in this community. "Mr. Montgomery, I understand your concern. Victoria could have chosen any man in the territory. That she selected me is a privilege I don't take lightly." Tom kept his voice level, but allowed a hint of steel to enter it. As for my qualifications, I'll let my management of our joint holdings speak for itself in the coming year. Results tend to quiet even the loudest critics. Several men nodded approvingly. Montgomery's face darkened, but before he could respond, the library door opened and Victoria appeared. "Gentlemen, the ladies are requesting your company for music in the drawing room," she announced, her gaze taking in the obvious tension. She moved to Tom's side, placing her hand on his arm in a gesture that appeared affectionate but felt like a warning. "I hope my husband hasn't been too thoroughly interrogated in my absence." "Not at all, my dear," Judge Bennett assured her. "We were just discussing the promising future of your combined operations." "How fortunate," Victoria replied, with a cool glance at Montgomery. "Tom has excellent ideas for expanding our breeding program. We were discussing them just this morning during our ride." As the men filed out, Victoria held Tom back with a slight pressure on his arm. "What did Philip say?" she asked once they were alone. "Nothing I couldn't handle," Tom assured her. "He questioned my qualifications and implied I married you for money. Both reasonable assumptions given the circumstances." "Perhaps, but he seems to take your marriage personally, Victoria." "Why?" She released his arm, moving to straighten a book on a nearby shelf, though it needed no adjustment. "Philip expected to control Harrington Holdings through me one way or another. First by marrying me himself, then by manipulating whomever I did marry." Her voice remained calm, but Tom detected underlying tension. "He underestimated my determination to remain independent, and now he'll look for ways to discredit you, to prove our marriage is a sham, to drive a wedge between us." Victoria turned to face him directly. "Be careful what you say to him, Tom, and to anyone who might report back to him." The warning in her voice was unmistakable, reminding Tom of their unusual arrangement and the precarious nature of his position. Whatever game Victoria was playing with her father's trustees, he was now irrevocably part of it. In the drawing room, one of the ladies was prevailed upon to play the piano. As the music filled the room, Victoria moved among her guests with practiced grace, the perfect hostess despite her reputation for reclusiveness. Tom watched her, noting how differently she presented herself in public compared to their private conversations. Here, she smiled more readily, laughed at appropriate moments, touched people's arms in friendly emphasis, all behaviors he had yet to experience directed at him. "She plays her role well, doesn't she?" came a voice at his elbow. Tom turned to find Dr. Sarah Wilson, the local physician, observing him with shrewd eyes. Unlike the other women present, Dr. Wilson wore a simple, practical dress with minimal ornamentation, her graying hair arranged in a no-nonsense bun. "I'm not sure I take your meaning, Doctor," Tom replied carefully. "No offense intended, Mr. Miller. I've known Victoria since she was born. Delivered her myself, in fact. She's always been two people, the public figure and the private soul." The doctor sipped her sherry. "The question is, which one have you married?" Before Tom could formulate a response, Victoria appeared at his side. "Dr. Wilson, I see you've met my husband." "Indeed, we were just becoming acquainted." The doctor's gaze was knowing. "I was telling him how pleased I am to see you settled." "At last, Victoria, your father would be relieved." Something flashed in Victoria's eyes, anger perhaps, or pain. "My father's opinions ceased to concern me long ago, Doctor, but I appreciate the sentiment." Dr. Wilson nodded, seemingly unperturbed by Victoria's coolness. "Well, I should be going. Early rounds tomorrow." She patted Victoria's hand in a familiar gesture that surprised Tom. "Don't forget your appointment next week, my dear. And Mr. Miller, welcome to Pinecrest Valley. I hope you'll find happiness here." As the doctor departed, Tom noted the slight tension in Victoria's posture. "You don't care for Dr. Wilson?" he asked quietly. On the contrary, she's one of the few people in this room I genuinely respect." Victoria's gaze followed the older woman's departure. "She's also dangerously perceptive." The evening concluded shortly before midnight, with guests departing full of good food, fine wine, and fresh gossip about the mysterious marriage. Tom played his part to the end, bidding farewell to each guest with his hand placed protectively at the small of Victoria's back, a gesture that felt increasingly natural as the night progressed. When the last carriage had departed, Victoria's shoulders slumped slightly, the only visible sign of fatigue after hours of social performance. "You did well," she acknowledged as they returned to the foyer. "Better than expected." "High praise indeed," Tom replied with a smile. "Does this mean I've earned my keep for the day?" Victoria's expression softened momentarily. "You've earned a good night's rest, at least." She glanced at the grandfather clock. "It's late, we should retire." Following their arranged pattern, Tom accompanied Victoria to her quarters. In the privacy of her sitting room, she removed her pearl necklace and earrings, placing them carefully in a velvet-lined box. The simple domestic action seemed strangely intimate, a glimpse behind the carefully maintained public persona. "Montgomery will be a problem," Tom observed, breaking the silence. Victoria nodded, unpinning her hair and allowing it to fall in copper waves down her back. The transformation was remarkable, from formal society hostess to a young woman suddenly vulnerable in her dishabille. "Philip doesn't accept defeat gracefully. He'll look for weaknesses in our arrangement." "Then we shouldn't present any," Tom suggested. "The more convinced everyone is of our genuine attachment, the less ammunition Montgomery will have." Victoria considered this, her green eyes thoughtful. "A reasonable strategy, but it would require convincing performance beyond these public events." "I'm a quick study," Tom assured her. "And I have excellent motivation. $20,000, remember?" Victoria's lips curved in a smile more genuine than any he'd seen her display for their guests. "Indeed. Well then, husband, I believe we have a new understanding. Good night." "Good night, wife," Tom replied, surprised by the warmth in his own voice. As he returned to his solitary room, Tom found himself dwelling on the multiple facets of Victoria Harrington he'd glimpsed in their short acquaintance. The businesswoman, the hostess, the vulnerable daughter by her mother's grave. And now the woman with copper hair falling freely down her back, momentarily unguarded in the privacy of her rooms. Which was the real Victoria? And what secret in the East Wing was important enough to risk visiting in the dead of night? Tom resolved to find out, even if it meant bending the rules of their arrangement. After all, if he was to convince others of their genuine attachment, shouldn't he know the truth about the woman he had married? "I've never known you to follow convention when a direct approach would serve better." Tom raised one hand to her cheek, his thumb gently tracing her jawline, "and I've never been more grateful for that quality than I am right now." Victoria leaned slightly into his touch, her usual reserve softening. "You haven't actually answered my proposal, Mr. Miller." "Haven't I?" Tom smiled. "Then let me be perfectly clear. Yes, Victoria Harrington, I would be honored to continue this marriage, not as your employee or contracted husband, but as your true partner in all things." The kiss that followed was nothing like the brief, formal contact of their wedding ceremony. This was a meeting of equals, tentative at first, then deepening with shared emotion too long contained. Victoria's arms wound around Tom's neck while his hands cradled her face with a gentleness that belied their strength. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Victoria regarded him with wondering eyes. "This was not at all what I expected when I sent that letter to Whispering Pines." "Life rarely follows our carefully laid plans," Tom replied, tucking a stray copper curl behind her ear. "Sometimes it offers something better instead." That night, for the first time, Tom didn't return to his solitary room. Instead, he remained with Victoria, their new understanding expressed in touches and whispers that required no contracts or witnesses. In the soft lamplight of her bedroom, the severe businesswoman and the struggling rancher discovered what had been building between them since those first days of their unlikely union. Morning found them breakfasting together in Victoria's private sitting room, a new intimacy coloring their interaction. Victoria, her hair loose around her shoulders, seemed younger, softer somehow, without the rigid persona she presented to the world. Tom, watching her pour coffee with the same precise movements she applied to business ledgers, realized he had fallen in love with both versions of his wife, the formidable businesswoman and the vulnerable woman who had begun to trust him with her true self. "What are you thinking?" Victoria asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "That I'm a fortunate man," Tom replied honestly, "and that we have decisions to make about our future." Victoria nodded, setting down her cup. "Yes, there will be practical matters to address. The legal status of our properties, the management structure of Harrington Holdings, your role in its operations." "Always the businesswoman," Tom observed with a smile. "I was thinking more of personal decisions, where we'll live, for instance." "Here, of course," Victoria replied automatically, then hesitated. "Unless... Would you prefer Whispering Pines? Now that the improvements are underway, it could be quite comfortable." The uncertainty in her voice touched Tom. This powerful woman, who managed an empire with unwavering confidence, was suddenly unsure about something as simple as their living arrangements. "I think we could maintain both," he suggested. "This will always be the Harrington family home, the center of operations. But perhaps Whispering Pines could be a retreat of sorts, somewhere simpler, away from the demands of business and society." Victoria considered this, her head tilted slightly. "I've never thought of having a retreat. Father believed in being present at the main house at all times. Said a business required constant vigilance." "Your father built something remarkable," Tom said gently, "but perhaps there are areas where his approach could be improved upon." "Balance is important, Victoria. Even the most dedicated rancher needs to rest occasionally." "Balance," Victoria repeated thoughtfully. "Not a concept I've given much consideration." She smiled suddenly, a bright, unguarded expression that transformed her face. "I find I'm willing to explore it, however, with you." The winter months passed in a blur of activity as they established their new partnership, both personal and professional. Victoria introduced Tom to every aspect of Harrington Holdings operations, from the breeding programs to the financial structures. Tom brought his practical knowledge of hands-on ranching, suggesting improvements that blended traditional methods with Victoria's more innovative approaches. Together they developed a management style that utilized both their strengths. Victoria remained the ultimate authority on business decisions, her sharp mind and attention to detail unmatched in the territory. Tom assumed responsibility for the day-to-day ranch operations, his natural rapport with the workers and hands-on approach earning him respect among the staff. "You've made quite an impression on Mackenzie," Victoria observed one evening as they reviewed the day's reports in the study that had become their shared workspace. "He actually smiled today when discussing the new breeding schedule." "Mackenzie's bark is worse than his bite," Tom replied, checking figures in a ledger. "He just needed someone to listen to his concerns about the thoroughbred program. 20 years of experience, deserves respect." Victoria set down her pen, studying him. "You have a gift for that, making people feel valued." "It's not a gift, just common sense." Tom looked up with a smile. "Every ranch hand, every house servant, every stable boy contributes to what makes Harrington Holdings successful. Acknowledging that isn't generosity, it's good business." "Perhaps." Victoria hesitated, then continued. My father didn't share that perspective. He believed firmly in hierarchy, clear lines of authority, distinct separation between those who give orders and those who follow them. And yet you've maintained fierce loyalty among your staff, Tom pointed out. Jenkins would walk through fire for you. Mackenzie defends. Your decisions like their gospel. That doesn't come from fear or rigid hierarchy. Victoria looked surprised. I've never thought about it that way. You're not your father, Victoria. You may have inherited his business acumen and determination, but you've brought your own strengths to this enterprise. That's why it's thriving under your leadership. The simple observation seemed to affect Victoria deeply. She rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered grounds illuminated by moonlight. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter than usual. I spent so many years trying to prove I could be what he wanted, the son he never had, the heir who would preserve his legacy exactly as he built it. She turned back to face Tom. I never considered that I might create something better by being myself. Tom crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Your father built the foundation. You're building the future. Both are valuable. Victoria's eyes softened as she looked up at him. How did you become so wise, Tom Miller? Not wisdom, he corrected with a smile. Just the clear vision of an outsider who sees you more clearly than you see yourself. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it new beginnings for the unlikely couple. The Montgomery case concluded with a decisive verdict, guilty on all counts, with a sentence of 20 years in territorial prison. The scandal gradually faded from Pinecrest Valley gossip as newer, more interesting topics arose, including the announcement that Dr. Sarah Wilson was taking on an apprentice, the first female medical student in the territory. Victoria and Tom settled into a rhythm that balanced work and private life, dividing their time between Harrington Heights and the newly renovated main house at Whispering Pines. The smaller property became their weekend retreat, a place where Victoria could set aside the mantle of the cattle baroness and simply be a woman enjoying her husband's company. It was at Whispering Pines, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the spring sky in shades of gold and crimson, that Victoria broached a subject they had not yet discussed. I visited Dr. Wilson yesterday, she said, her voice carefully neutral. For a consultation. Are you unwell? Tom asked, immediately concerned. No. Victoria's fingers twisted slightly in her lap, a rare gesture of nervousness. Quite the opposite, in fact. Dr. Wilson confirmed that we're going to have a child. The words hung in the air between them, monumental in their significance. Tom stared at her, momentarily speechless, his heart suddenly racing. A child, he repeated finally, the words feeling strange on his tongue. We're going to have a baby. Victoria nodded, watching his face anxiously. In late October, Dr. Wilson believes. I understand this wasn't part of our arrangement. Even our new arrangement. If you're not ready for such responsibility. Tom cut off her words by kneeling before her chair and gathering her hands in his. Victoria Harrington Miller, he said firmly. Nothing in my life has ever made me happier than this news. Nothing. The tension left her body in a visible wave, relief softening her features. Truly, truly. Tom placed a gentle hand on her still flat stomach, awe in his expression. A child. Our child. A new generation to inherit all that you've built, all that we're building together. Victoria covered his hand with her own, her usual composure giving way to genuine emotion. I never thought I would have this, she admitted softly. A husband who respects me, work that fulfills me, and now a child. It seems almost too perfect. Not perfect, Tom corrected gently. Real. with all the challenges and complications that entails. But we'll face them together, just as we've faced everything else. The news of Victoria's pregnancy spread quickly through Pinecrest Valley, generating a fresh wave of interest in the couple whose unusual beginning had transformed into one of the territory's most admired marriages. Victoria approached motherhood with the same determined efficiency she applied to business matters, reading every medical text Dr. Wilson could provide, planning nursery renovations at both properties, and establishing a schedule that would allow her to maintain oversight of Harrington Holdings while preparing for the baby's arrival. Tom watched her preparations with affectionate amusement, occasionally intervening when her planning became too rigid or ambitious. "The baby hasn't read your schedule, Victoria," he reminded her one evening as she outlined a detailed plan for returning to full duties 3 weeks after the birth. "Some things can't be managed by sheer determination." Victoria looked up from her notes with a frown. "That's precisely the attitude I'm trying to counter. Women have been having children since the beginning of humanity. There's no reason it should disrupt operations for months on end. No reason except creating and nurturing a new human being," Tom replied mildly. "Something even the great Victoria Harrington might find requires adjustment." Her frown deepened, but Tom could see the uncertainty beneath it. For all her confidence in business matters, Victoria approached motherhood as unknown territory, frightening in its unpredictability. "What if I'm not suited for it?" she asked suddenly, voicing the fear she had kept hidden. "Being a mother, what if I'm too cold, too focused on business? My own mother was so warm, so nurturing. Everything I'm not." Tom moved to her side, taking her hands in his. "Victoria, look at me." When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, "You are the most capable, determined person I've ever known. Those qualities don't make you cold, they make you strong. And our child will need your strength just as much as your love. But how do you know I can love properly?" The vulnerability in her question revealed depths of insecurity Tom had never suspected lay beneath her confident exterior. "I wasn't raised to express emotions. Father always said feelings were a distraction from what mattered." "And yet you love," Tom said simply. "You loved your father enough to risk everything to protect him. You love this land, this legacy you're building. And," he added softly, "you love me even if you find the words difficult to say." Victoria's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "I've never said—" "You didn't need to," Tom smiled. "It's in everything you do. The way you seek my opinion, the way your eyes follow me across a room, the way you let down your guard when we're alone." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Love isn't just words, Victoria. It's actions, and your actions speak clearly." Her arms went around him, holding tight. "I do love you," she whispered against his chest. "More than I ever thought possible." "I know," Tom replied, stroking her copper hair, now loosened from its daytime arrangement. "And you'll love our child the same way, completely, fiercely, in your own unique fashion. Not like your mother, not like anyone else. Like Victoria Harrington Miller, which is exactly what our child needs." Summer passed into early autumn, Victoria's body changing as the baby grew. To Tom's relief, she finally conceded that her original ambitious schedule might need adjustment, delegating more day-to-day responsibilities to trusted managers and spending more time at Whispering Pines, where the pace was gentler and the surroundings more peaceful. It was there, on a crisp October morning, with the aspen trees glowing gold against a clear blue sky, that Victoria's labor began. Tom sent a ranch hand galloping for Dr. Wilson while he helped Victoria to their bedroom, his outward calm belying the terror he felt at her first cry of pain. "Too early," Victoria gasped, gripping his hand with surprising strength. "The baby's not due for another week." Babies follow their own schedules, Tom reminded her, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. Just like their mother. Victoria managed a strained smile between contractions. If our child is half as stubborn as either of us, we're in for quite an adventure. The labor progressed rapidly, Dr. Wilson arriving just in time for the final stages. As the sun reached its midday height, casting golden light through the bedroom windows, a lusty cry announced the arrival of James Thomas Harrington Miller, named for both his grandfathers, but as Victoria insisted, bound by neither of their legacies. Tom, holding his son for the first time, marveled at the perfect miniature fingers and the shock of copper hair that marked him unmistakably as Victoria's child. "He's magnificent," he whispered, carefully placing the swaddled infant in Victoria's arms. The transformation that came over Victoria's face as she gazed down at their child was something Tom knew he would remember until his dying day. All her careful composure, her businesslike reserve, melted away, replaced by a look of such profound wonder and love that it brought tears to his eyes. "Hello, little one," she murmured, her voice gentler than Tom had ever heard it. "I've been waiting for you." Dr. Wilson, packing her medical bag, paused to observe the new family. "Well," she said with satisfaction, "I'd say this arrangement has turned out rather well, wouldn't you, Victoria?" Victoria looked up, her eyes bright, with uncharacteristic tears. "Better than any business deal I've ever negotiated, Doctor." "You know," Dr. Wilson continued conversationally, "when you first told me your plan to marry a stranger to secure your inheritance, I thought you'd lost your mind." She glanced approvingly at Tom. "I'm pleased to have been proven wrong." "As am I," Victoria admitted. She reached for Tom's hand, holding it alongside their son. "What began as a transaction has become the greatest blessing of my life." As autumn deepened into winter, the Harrington Miller family established new rhythms centered around the baby's needs. Victoria, to everyone's surprise, including her own, took to motherhood with the same determination and attention to detail she brought to business matters. She insisted on nursing James herself rather than hiring a wet nurse, arranged her work schedule around his needs, and could often be found in the nursery reading ledgers aloud to him as he dozed in her arms. "He needs to understand the business from the beginning," she explained when Tom found them thus one evening. "Whether he chooses to take it over someday or not, this legacy is part of his birthright." "Along with whispering pines," Tom added, settling beside them in the rocking chair. "He'll have choices we didn't have, Victoria. Options beyond what either of us could have imagined." Victoria nodded, her expression thoughtful as she gazed down at their sleeping son. "Sometimes I think about how differently everything might have turned out. If Montgomery had succeeded, if you had refused my offer, if we had remained merely business partners." "A great many ifs," Tom agreed, "but here we are, despite all the odds, and I wouldn't change a moment of the journey that brought us here, not even the part where I essentially purchased you as a husband." Victoria asked with a raised eyebrow, the humor in her voice reflecting how far they had come from those initial awkward days. "Well, perhaps that part could have been more romantically arranged," Tom conceded with a grin. "But the outcome has been satisfactory, I think." Victoria's free hand found his, their fingers intertwining comfortably. "More than satisfactory, Mr. Miller. I'd call it a most profitable venture indeed." As winter settled over Montana territory, bringing deep snows and long evenings before the fire, the unlikely couple who had begun as strangers bound by a business contract found themselves enjoying the richest dividend of their arrangement. A genuine family built on respect, partnership, and a love that had grown slowly but unshakably from the most practical of beginnings. In the library of Harrington Heights, now filled with the baby's toys, alongside the business ledgers, Victoria sometimes paused in her work to watch Tom with their son, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in little more than a year. What had begun as a desperate strategy to retain control of her inheritance had blossomed into something far more valuable, a partnership of equals, a legacy secured not through legal maneuvering, but through genuine bonds of family. And on the last day of the year, as snow fell softly outside and James slept peacefully in his cradle beside them, Victoria raised her glass in a private toast. "To unexpected outcomes," she said, her green eyes warm in the firelight. Tom clinked, his glass against hers, and to business arrangements that become so much more. As the clock struck midnight, bringing a new year full of possibilities, their lips met in a kiss that sealed not a contract, but a covenant. One founded not on convenience or necessity, but on the most profitable investment of all: love freely, given and joyfully returned. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.